All right. Good afternoon to you all, friends and colleagues, and those who are online at this time. I trust and I believe everyone is doing good, and especially those who are going to join me in this short live Facebook video broadcast where we are trying to respond or we are trying to review a discussion, sort of debate that I had with one preacher, a J or a Jew in Nuamah, something like that. He's a preacher in Kumasi here in Ghana, and I had a live Facebook video discussion with him on Matthew chapter number 24 as to whether this text talks about the or pertains to the parousia, what is usually called the second coming of Christ. And so, I have taken my time to review this debate because during this time we are allotted a time and you cannot do everything within that short time frame. So there are some allegations that or there are some issues that he raised which he believed I did not address. But as I said, because of the time factor, I have to kind of like run through certain things, and I believe that because of that he believed that I did not touch on. But that is just by the way. This is the second video in a series, of the review of this debate. And actually, he believes that there is a component of Matthew chapter number 24, which pertains to the second coming of Christ. But he believed that that has not yet come. That has not yet come at all. So, but I held a position that it is one prophecy, that was fulfilled in connection with the fall of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. But he disagreed with me on that cause. Now, so this is what happened, during the debate or during the discussion, I should say. So we went to, we started with a chapter. We started with the first verse of Matthew chapter number 21, and we concluded that verse 1 to verse 3 talk about or generate three different questions, but they are interrelated. Actually, he wanted to uh, view it as separate questions, that are unrelated. But I believe that they, relate because they talk about one and the same. Two or one points to the coming of the two. Okay, one of the question points to the fulfillment of the two remaining legs or two remaining questions. Okay, so this is it in Matthew chapter number 24 and the verses 1. It says that then the disciples went out and departed from the temple, and his disciple came up to show him the buildings of the temple. Now verse 2. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Then now verse 3. It says that now as he sat on Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And you see, so that's a conjunction. You see, and is conjoining the two. So you cannot separate the two. You cannot separate the two because and is conjunction. I believe those who did part of speech or figure or whatever, and is conjoining the two. So um, tell us, when will these things be? What will and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So it is one in three. One question comprising of three sub questions, if you please. So we are not talking about different questions. We are not talking about different separate questions. They are one and the same. Okay. However, they are put in three different categories or three different, way. when will these things be? And the sign, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age or eon? And so, I mean, this the employment of conjunction in this question indicate that it is one and the same. It's a three in one question. Okay, they are not separate. In terms of what was going to happen, it was something concurrent. If you please. Now, this is what the preacher said. He believed that these two out of these three questions have been fulfilled in 70 AD, and these are the destruction of the temple and the end of the age. He believed that the end of the age is the Jewish age, of course, which I also believe that the age in question is the Jewish age, and the temple has been destroyed. But he believed that the sign of your coming, the coming has not yet occurred. Even though when you read, a bit further, you realize that, especially in verse 30-31, it talks about the cloud coming of the Lord, attended by the angels, and so on and so forth. But he believed that that has not yet occurred, even to the extent that in verse 34, it says that those generation will by no means pass away till all these things, take place. But he believed that all these things is related to the destruction of the temple and the consummation of the age, if you please. See, that is the kind of problem people have, and this is what they tend to preach the congregation, the congregant. Okay, so that they go out believing that two out of the three questions have been answered, and the third, or the second one, the middle question has not been fulfilled or was not answered in 70 AD or in the first century. Even though Jesus said that all these things will come upon those generation, he believed that all these things is two out of three. That is exclusive to the destruction of the temple, or exclusive to or related to the destruction of the temple, as well as the end of Jewish age. But I said that no, that is not the case. All the three questions were fulfilled or came fulfilled in that generation, in Jesus' contemporary generation, in the first century. It didn't say some of these will come upon them, or some of these will take place. It didn't say some. He said that all. So how can you then find two out of the all? Now, I read wiser than Jesus when he said that all. Why are you then saying some? Jesus said all, but those preachers believe that Jesus said some will be fulfilled. I don't think that that is correct. That is accurate. That is not what Jesus meant when he said all these things. All means that all the three questions will be answered in that generation. At least not all of them will die till all these things, take place. And that include the fall of the temple, the return of the Lord, as well as the consummation of the Jewish age. All of these, these three were fulfilled or occurred or took place in connection with the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, but let's see. I mean, before we even do that, let's see. He also raised another serious question, another serious, point, which I will also address, in this video. Now, in verse 14, Matthew chapter number 24, verse 14. So in there, Jesus said that, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world. Now that is the okumeni, that is the inhabitable earth of the first century. That is the meaning of the word world here, not the universe, but the okumeni. That is the world in which they lived in the first century. So Jesus said that, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. All right, so the end is going to come after the gospel has been promulgated or has been spread out in the world in the first century. Now let's see if this condition was met in the first century, whether the gospel was preached to all creation, was preached to all people, and so on and so forth. Now, so there's what we call analogy of faith. Okay, let Bible interpret itself, and also what else? Bible cannot contradict itself. Okay, so let's see if this condition, which will consummate the end, was met or was fulfilled, was met in the first century. Now, this is Paul. Paul was living in the eschaton. He was living in the end. Okay, in according to First Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. So this is what was taking place there. This is what Paul said in the first century. Who was living in the in the end. Now, let's start at Romans chapter number. For sake of time, I don't think I'll be able to read them all the all these texts out, but I will leave the rest to you to to look at it later. Now, so in Romans chapter number 9, starting at verse 8, Romans chapter number 1, sorry, and the verse is 8. It says that first, I thank God, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. So that is the okumeni in which they lived in that Roman Empire, in that Roman Empire world. That is the world, which Paul lived in the first century. He was living in, and then he says that the faith of the church at Rome is spoken throughout the world in the first century. So how did this faith come by? Now remember in Romans chapter number 10, I believe starting at verse 18, it says faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of God. All right, so Paul again argues that if they are not sent, how would the gospel be preached and how will they hear it? Okay, so that means that Paul was fulfilling the mandate the Lord entrusted to his care, which is to preach the word or the gospel to all the creation, all the nation, in order to consummate the end. Okay, so he is saying that this end, this condition has been met, all the way in the late AD 58. Okay, when Paul wrote this letter. Another one, the same book of Roman, and the verse is 10. Let's look at verse 18. Okay, so let's see, because it says that, and the consummation of this age, okay, the end of this age. And Christ said that, no, Jesus said that the end will come after the gospel has been preached to all creations or the inhabitable nation in the first century. So in verse 18, it says that, verse 8, Romans chapter number 10, verse 18 says that, now, okay, let's start at verse 17. This is the text that I wanted to use, in connection with or in unison with Romans chapter number 1, verse 8. So in verse 18, 17, it says that, so then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But they have not, now I said that, but verse 15, how shall they preach unless they are sent? So it means that they were sent to preach the gospel to all to all creations, all nations, also of which Paul said that has been spoken out, has been preached out throughout the world in the first century. Now in verse 18 says that, but I say, have they not heard? Yes, indeed. Excuse me. Yes, indeed. Their sound has gone out to all the earth. That is the gay, all the land in the land of Palestine, all the land, that inhabitable land in the first century. Their sound has gone out to all the earth, and the word to the ends of the world. What did Jesus Christ, what condition did Jesus Christ give in connection with the consummation of the end? It says that this gospel of the kingdom will have to be preached first to all the inhabitable earth, all the creatures, and the end will come. Okay, so this indicates that the end was within the first century and not beyond it, because the condition that will culminate, that will sort of sort of consummate the end, was met in the first century, not something in our time, but it was something that was met in the first century. And another one is the same Roman chapter number Roman chapter number 16. Then I'll give you the rest. Then you can look at it. Roman chapter number 16. Starting at verse 25, 26. Now it says that, Now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ according to the revelation of the mystery kept secret since the world began. Now verse 20 says, but now that is when he wrote this letter in AD 58. Now let me say that according to the revelation of the mystery kept secret since the world began. Verse 26. But now made manifest and by prophetic scriptures made known to all nations according to the commandment of the everlasting God for obedience to the faith. So again, this indicates that the gospel was preached to the world which existed in the first century. Now, the last of it all, then we continue with the rest. See, I am trying to demonstrate. I demonstrated to him that the end was met in the first century, and everything, including the return, all occurred in first century. Now, in Colossians chapter number 1, where is Colossians? Colossians chapter number 1, verse 5 and 6, this is what Paul said. Says that which has come to you, as it has also in all the world. Now that is talking about a gospel, that is the gospel of truth, if you want to start at verse. Okay, let's start at verse 5. Because of the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, of which you heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel, which has come to you as it has also in all the world, and is bringing forth fruit as it is also among you since the day you heard and knew the grace of God in truth. So this is uh prima facie, kind of like evidence that in terms of the preaching of the gospel, which will consummate to the end, was met and was fulfilled in the first century. So you cannot have the end beyond, first century. You understand now? So back to Matthew chapter number 24. So end, of course, occurred in the first century, specifically when Jewish state, fell in 70 AD to the Roman army. Now, in Matthew chapter number 24, this is one serious allegation the preacher made. Now, he believed that the signs that are mentioned in the chapter is one unrelated to the parousia or the coming of the Lord. That is what he believed. You see, this is what he will stand before his church congregation, the congregant, and this is what he's going to teach them. That look, the signs that were mentioned in this text are unrelated to the return of the Lord, but rather to the fall of the temple. You see, it's a very, very serious allegation. It's a very, very serious point that he raised in that, in that discussion or debate, whatever he want to put, that to. What did the apostles or the disciples ask Christ? What did they ask him? When will all these things be, or when will these things be? And the sign of your coming and the consummation of this age. And he believed that the sign that were mentioned, that will inform them of the imminent return of the Lord, is unrelated to the coming of the Lord, but it is one related to the fall of the temple. You see how, I don't know, see how people can argue, okay, just to, show up what they have been made to believe, in order to affirm what they have been made to believe. You see, they are not ready to renounce, these things. That a question was asked which demands the sign of the parousia. Jesus Christ gave enough sign which will inform the faithful in the first century of his return. So when Peter said that the end of all things is at hand in 1 Peter 4, verse 5 to 7, he knew what he was talking about. It was to tell the Christians that, look, the coming of the Lord is already at hand, because all the signs of the end, all the signs of his coming, because the end will consummate his coming. The end will, will be the one which will, demonstrate his presence, his parousia. These are the signs. The end. Jesus Christ appeared at the end of ages. That is what my Hebrew chapter 9 verse 26 said. He said that yet, verse 24, 25, 26, said that yet once more, once at the end of the ages, he has appeared, that is apocalypse, the revelation. He has revealed to do what? To put away sin. So the coming of the Lord in the second time is the time to consummate salvation. It's going to come to complete or to finish the work, the redemptive process, which was begun, at the cross. And don't we have that fulfilled in 70 AD? In Luke chapter number 21, we have the coming of the Lord, the clouds coming of the Lord, tied to the time of the redemption, the time of salvation, the end of that sociological process which began at the cross. Matthew chapter 21, verse 27, 28. And the kingdom is also there in verse 31. It says that all these things will come upon this generation in the first century. So how do we then have, two out of the questions answered and postpone the third one beyond the first century to 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years ahead, 2,000 years and still counting? How does that add up? But yet this is what these people want us to believe. The sign of your coming. And Jesus Christ enumerated numerous signs which will inform the Christians in the first century that, look, the coming of the Lord is at hand. They knew. The Christians in the first century knew the day of the Lord. They know the day of the judgment, the day of salvation. They know all this. They knew because the spirit that was working in the apostles, told them, or at least word gave word of this as happening in their days. I mean, it is all these things are there. But people don't want to, see this. Don't you have that in Hebrew chapter number 10, verse 25, that when you see the day, what is the day? It's the day of the Lord coming. They shouldn't, forsake assembling as they see the day of the Lord coming. So in the first century, all the signs were available, to inform or to tell them that, look, the day of the Lord is at hand. That is what we have in Hebrew chapter 10, verse 25. Okay, so these signs were pointing to the return of the Lord and not necessarily the fall of the temple. So to argue that the signs mentioned in this text is exclusive to the fall of the temple instead of the day of the Lord is to is to do the service to the scriptures, because it says that the sign of your coming, and Jesus Christ gave a lot of signs. Now we are just going to look at two signs, and we are going to demonstrate to you that signs always point to the return of the Lord or return of God, as He has always did in the prior to the New Testament age. Now, so in verse 29, Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, Jesus Christ, gave a lot of signs, the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Of course, that is Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 following. What else? The birth pang. Okay, we have the birth pang in verse 8. And also the time of tribulation, which has no rival, verse 21. So a lot of signs were given, which will inform them of the imminent return of the Lord. All right, so when you get to verse 29, this is what Jesus said. He said that immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now let him talk. A little bit about this tribulation. Now it is one thing. It is one tribulation. The prophet spoke about. They predicted this tribulation, that will uh, come upon the church in the last days. So Jacob, what we call Jacob trouble in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 6 and 7, you can read it. Also Daniel chapter number 12 and verse 1. And Jesus Christ quoted a prophet and posited this tribulation in the first century, or in the context of the fall of Jerusalem in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. Okay, and of course, in the first century, the apostles, the church said that they were in this tribulation foretold by the prophet and Jesus Christ himself. I know in First Peter chapter number 5, verse 1, it says that I am in, let me just let me look at it because I used to have them offered, but okay. So in First Peter chapter 5, verse 1, it says that the elders who are among you, I exhort, I whom a fellow elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ, and uh, also partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Now the revelation of this glory is tied to the return of the Lord, because it's going to come return in the glory of the Father, of which was needed in the first century in order that they will have relief from this tribulation. In Romans chapter number 8, verse 18 to 19, Paul called it this present, the suffering of the present times. First Corinthians chapter 7, verse 26, the distress of this present time, which is incomparable to the glory that will be revealed. So they needed this glory, which uh, is tantamount to the revelation of Christ, in order that Christ will come to relieve them from this tribulation by destroying those who persecute them. Okay, so of course, this Peter said that he was in this tribulation. When you go to Revelation chapter number 1 and the verses 9, Revelation chapter number 1, verse 9, let's listen to what John said. He said that I, John, both your brother and companion in the tribulation and the kingdom. You see, Paul called it present distress. See, so it tells you that this tribulation is one unrelated to what we witness today. No, what we witness today is unrelated to that eschatological tribulation that befell the church in the first century. Their tribulation was a special kind of tribulation. It says that that tribulation has no, rival. You understand? So, of course, I understand some Christians one way or the other experience this tribulation. But what I am trying to say is that what the church experienced in the first century is one unrelated to whatever you are going through today. Because to them, it was strictly uh, they were in that tribulation as a result of their faith, for being Christian, for the witness, as Revelation put it. Let me read what Revelation said. As Revelation put it, it says that, and I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God. So these people were killed for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, and because they failed to worship, Judaism, they failed to go by that way. So this is the reason for which they were slew, is because of the witness to Jesus and also for the word of God. So this is a special kind of tribulation that befell the church in the first century. And of course, they were in that distress. Paul said that with many tribulation, we must enter into the kingdom. Acts chapter 14, verse 22. So they were in this tribulation altogether in the first century. So the Lord is going to come to relieve them. But how is he going to do that? By destroying those who persecute them. What did Paul say in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 4 to 6? It is a righteous thing for God to repay with tribulation those who troubled you, the Thessalonians. And when you read Acts chapter number 9, 17, verse 1 to 13, it was unbelieving Jews who were persecuting the Christians, Jason and Co., the first fruit of faithfuls in the city of Thessalonica in the first century. And Paul is assuring them that wait, the Lord is going to come to destroy those who troubles you. All these things occurred in the first century. So to posit the parousia, the return of the Lord beyond the first century, is to do the service to the scriptures. But this is what I want to say, in this. In the 29th verse of Matthew chapter number 24, this is what Jesus said. Because this preacher believed that the signs were merely pointing to the fall of the temple, but not the return of the Lord. And that is that is false. Give us the sign of your coming. And he gave them the sign. He said, no, this sign does not pertains to the parousia, pertains to the clouds coming of the Lord, but rather the fall of the temple. But meanwhile, even when you read the parallel text in Luke chapter 21, verse 27, and the cloud coming of the Lord is there. So what are you talking about? See, I believe that he has to restudy his eschatology again. But in Matthew chapter number 24 and the verses 29, this is what is stated there. Now it says that, so immediately after the tribulation, the Lord is going to come to rescue them, to deliver them. Daniel chapter 20, Daniel chapter 12, connected the time of deliverance, the time of tribulation and stuff like that to the time of the return of the Lord. But it says that this is going to take place when Jerusalem is fall, when Israel is destroyed, in verse 7, Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. Now, so let's see. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, this is what you call apocalyptic Jewish judgment language. It is one judgment language which was well known by the Jews in the first century. Okay, but it's because in 21st century some of us are not well acquainted with the application, the use or the idea and the concept of this apocalyptic language. So he doesn't even see the connection, between verse 29 and verse 30 and verse 31. Why do you think that they connected that? Because the Jews in the first century knew that they are going to see him through this event. In John chapter number 5, verse 19 following, Jesus said that he's going to act in judgment exactly as he has seen the Lord acted in judgment in the past. So how had the Father, he was going to come in the glory of the Father. So how had the Father acted in judgment in the past? All right, so when you go to, first of all, let's look at, I'm just going to read two, and read one and give the remaining two texts to you to do the studies or the reading on your own in your house, because my time is almost over. I sat some time for myself, and I believe that the time is already over. Now, this is what I am saying. So when you look at uh, um, let's look at Isaiah. Isaiah chapter number 13. This is judgment. Isaiah chapter number 13, and this is judgment against Babylon. So let's see how the prophet used the language of destruction of Babylon, and see, they were the Jewish people. They were familiar with this language. Now it said that the burden against Babylon, which Isaiah son of Amos saw. Now when it comes to verse 6, it says that, let's start at verse 5. And now it says that they come from a far country. So God used Egypt, far country, to destroy it or to judge Babylon, to judge Nebuchadnezzar. Now it says that they come from a far country, from the end of heaven. The Lord and his weapons of indignation to destroy the whole land. So God used Egypt as his instrument of judgment to carry out this or to execute this judgment against Babylon. The same thing in the last days, in the second coming of Christ, the Lord used the Roman army as his instrument of judgment to destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD. So it is one thing that was well known in the first century by the first century believers and the Jews in general. Now, verse 6, wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. So it didn't take 2,000 years and still come for that judgment to befell Babylon. For the day of the Lord is at hand; it will come as destruction from the Almighty. So Egypt destroying Babylon was God acting in judgment, and this is how Jesus said that He's going to come. He's going to come, and He's going to come act in judgment, or He's going to come in judgment exactly as He has seen the Father, acted in judgment in the past. He did not physically bodily come, but he came using the true, or what you call, he came through, or he carried out that judgment through instrumentality. Okay, maybe using whales and snows and stuff like that. Okay, or use nation against nation. You understand what you call theophanic, appearance of the Lord, manifestation of God through historical event, and that is how God has always acted in judgment. That is exactly how Christ also acted in judgment in the first century. All right, so when you get to verse 9, because of whatever, here to it mentioned verse 8, it says that, and they will be afraid, pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. Now we have birth pangs and stuff like that also in the first, stated in Matthew chapter 24. Now verse 8, it said that they will be afraid. Okay. Now verse 9 said, behold, the day of the Lord comes. The day of the Lord comes. Now, if this was stated in the New Testament, people will say that no, this has not come yet. It is something 2,000 years and we are still counting. It is coming soon. Since since the Bible, the New Testament writers, started, putting together their writings, people have always been saying he's coming, soon, 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 soon. So it says that behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger to lay the land desolate. Now Jerusalem is going to be laid desolate. Matthew chapter 23, verse 39 and verse 38. Your house is left to you desolate. And that desolation occurred in 70 AD when you see abomination of desolation standing in the most holy place. So you have that desolation occurring in 70 AD in connection with the fall of the temple. Now, to late now, verse 10. Now, verse 10, listen very carefully. For the stars of heaven and their constellation will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. This is apocalyptic judgment language used in the case of Babylon. So when Jesus Christ spoke this word in Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, they knew what Jesus was talking about. They knew he was talking about his coming. They didn't know the day and hour, but of course they knew that the fall of the temple will consummate his parousia. And so you have Matthew chapter 24, verse 39 there, and it says that no, these signs were merely pointing to the fall of the temple. No, you have to study the apocalyptic. You have to, study this Jewish language. Then you understand. You wouldn't make this argument even in the first place. All right, so now verse 11, he said that I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. Now, this were turns the Jews in the last days were also doing. Now let's get to verse 13. In verse 13 it says that therefore I will shake the heavens. Don't you have that in Matthew chapter 24? Similar language employed in connection with the fall of Jerusalem. God acting in judgment. This is, it says that the day of the Lord is at hand. This is God acting in judgment, and his coming in judgment was described using this well-known apocalyptic language. So when you come to New Testament and you see this language appearing, it is God acting in judgment, and that is Jesus coming in judgment. And he said that, what are you saying? He said that this sign did not point to the return of the Lord. What are you doing? What are you saying, my brother? You have to look at it again. Therefore, I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of a place in the wrath of. He said that in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his fire, what anger. So when you come to now, another one is in judgment against Edom, Isaiah chapter number 20, Isaiah chapter 34, verse 1. Following, you can read it. Also, judgment against Egypt in Isaiah chapter number 19. You can also look at it in Isaiah chapter number 19. You can also read it, verse 1. It says that the burden against Egypt, behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and will come into Egypt. Now, don't we have the Lord coming in the clouds of heaven in Matthew chapter 24? And how do you then separate verse 9, verse 29 from verse 30 and verse 31? No, that is not the case. The Jews in the first century knew what Christ was talking about. All right, so in conclusion, we are about to conclude because my time is even fast spent. I didn't want to even go beyond that, beyond 30 minutes, but it's now almost 40 minutes. Anyway, so in verse 29, this is what we have there. What Jesus Christ was saying is that destruction is his coming, his parousia in judgment against Egypt. And that is in Israel, and that is the final judgment. That is the final coming. We don't have multiple comings of Christ in the New Testament. People try to make a lot of argument. I have written on the verse 39, the day and hour no man knows. Just go on my page, search it and you'll find it to understand what that also means. It doesn't mean it is dividing the chapter. It is one and the same. So when these signs are, when he finished, he said that, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then he said that, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He believed that this has not yet occurred. Because, once he admitted he's going to destroy his eschatology, and he will send his angels and a great sound of trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from four winds from one end of heaven to another. And he believed that this has not yet occurred. I mean, he raised a lot of serious argument, and I will be addressing it as we have started reviewing those debates. Now in verse 39, in verse 34, let's see. It says that assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. These things include the clouds coming, the gathering, and everything. And he believed that no, 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 no. This all turns means some turns. It means 2/3, the temple destruction and the end of the age, but not the coming of the Lord. But he says that all these things, that is 3/3. All the three questions will come upon that generation which lived in the first century. So see, his argument has no substance, and I believe that you can also do your own studies. We have to end here. Hope to come your way probably some other time. Until we meet again, we say bye.